welcome everybody to this episode of Inclusively, where I'm delighted to say we have with us representatives from Salesforce to talk about the journey that Salesforce has been through in building a more and more inclusive environment for its employees and of course for its customers. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jacqui and Adam. Jacqui, would you like to introduce yourself to the Inclusively group?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, I'm Jacqui Tolisano. I'm Senior Director of Product Accessibility here at Salesforce. I've been with Salesforce for just over 2 years, but I've been in the accessibility space since 2012, and I'm located in Massachusetts. Nice to be here.
Good to have you. And Adam?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Adam Rodenbeck, and I am a senior accessibility engineer on our product accessibility and inclusive design team with Jacqui. I've been at Salesforce for just over 7 years now, and prior to working here, my background is in software development, and I'm also blind.
Excellent. Well, that's so for once in a room there are 50% blind people. That's very, very good. We can tick off that quotient figure, can't we? So the idea behind Inclusively that Monica and I have been working our way through different organizations and seeing how they deal with it or don't deal with it, and where work is required. What I'd love to do first of all is perhaps Jacqui just to give us a bit of the history and how the inclusion topic has gradually built within the Salesforce organization.
Absolutely. So we really kind of want to make sure that our corporate values are baked into everything that we do. And we want to make sure that there's equality and equity in the work that we do. And we want to make sure that the right voices have a say and help inform what we do. So we have an inclusive design director that we work with, and we try and bring users into the work that we do to make sure that their lived experience is something that that provides that feedback in order for us to make changes to our UI. So how that has evolved is through the creation of our team. So our team has had various locations, and Adam can jump in and kind of share more of that historical perspective since he's been here for so long. But the team has kind of had different places or different houses, and what happened to really cement our team in the inclusion aspect is when Paula Goldman, our Executive Vice President over our Office of Ethical and Humane Use, took over accessibility. And we hired an inclusive design director so that we're really talking the talk and walking the walk and making sure that our products are usable by everyone. So I don't know if Adam wants to jump in and share a little bit of a historical perspective of how our team has evolved over time.
Yeah, I think that Jacqui kind of alluded to this, that we had been in a few different places and trying to find what made the most sense for the accessibility team is starting out in user experience and now moving into what we call the product side of things, where there's a little more emphasis on how things are built and using UX and engineering as the tools then to make that happen. So now that we are directly under the Office of Ethical and Humane Use, we're solidly in that product organization, and I think that has given us a lot more connection to the people then that are in control of what's being built and when.
And is it fair to say that the topic of accessibility inclusion sort of permeates throughout the senior management? Because obviously in the past, accessibility inclusion was sort of a corporate social responsibility issue, so it was in a foundation almost in a separate organization bit. But it seems to me that within Salesforce, even up to Mark Benioff, that it resonates even that high up the organization.
It does. And it's helpful to have that top-down support for accessibility. So a lot of us that have been in the accessibility space for years and years in previous jobs where we've struggled to have it be that bottom-up approach where you have to kind of have that grassroots buy-in and you're, meeting with the teams, but you don't have a lot of that executive support. It really is very different here at Salesforce, where we have from the very top top on down to our executive leadership, and we even have executive sponsors for our programs to make sure that accessibility is prioritized, and it is part of the work that we do every year. And so we have, Paula Goldman, like I mentioned her earlier, she's our executive vice president, so she sits on top of our organization, but we also have a steering committee, and we have executive sponsorship there from different executive vice presidents, and Mark Benioff has accessibility listed within his goals to make sure that our products are usable by as many people as possible.
I guess
May
it also.
I ask the question the other way around, because clearly you want to have the top support from the top to motivate and create the right incentives, but eventually the people that do all the work is the company wide. And so how do you get the buy-in from everybody besides providing the motivation? Do they have the skills? Do they know, even if they want to, how to enable them?
Yeah, so that's where our team comes in. So we're the product accessibility and inclusive design team, and we partner with teams through a variety of programs as well as ongoing support. So when teams have, an accessibility issue, they can come to us for help to resolve that or validation testing. But what we are doing on our team is a coordinated, multi-pronged approach of creating programs that help to improve accessibility, as well as meeting the needs of our teams and actually embedding resources to help them to prevent accessibility bugs from shipping, as well as solving the accessibility issues that they may currently be dealing with. And so, meeting with them and getting them to understand that we're a partner of theirs, right? That we're here to help them, that we're absolutely here to get them to upskill with regard to accessibility, because our small team can't do it all. And the best way to do it is to partner with these teams, get them to understand that, we're here to help, and then having them evolve and upskill so that they become more and more independent with regard to accessibility. So I don't know, Adam, if you want to share some of your experience working with teams from that capacity.
One of the things that I've been working on is working directly with our, what we call base components team. So we did a lot of foundational work to ensure that the building blocks of Salesforce are accessible. And our hope then is that as you stitch those different components together, then that will create an accessible experience. And if you know that the blocks themselves are accessible, then the work is a little more to make sure that as we put them together, that's creating the experience that we were looking for. So that ends up being then what people spend their time testing, is whether or not those connections are in the right way, that things ended up in the right places in the DOM so that the tab order and the keyboard support makes sense.
And in terms of that testing, obviously, Adam, you and I are in the same boat in terms of using screen readers and the like. In the rest of the team, is the rest of the team have sort of the lived experience of accessibility issues? Because we sort of face an enormous challenge, don't we? The diversity of even vision impaired is enormous, let alone all of the hearing impaired or cognitive issues and stuff like that. So how do you represent all of those options within your team?
So we do have multiple assistive technology users on our team, and we also have people with a variety of disabilities as well. Not everyone on the team, considers themselves disabled. So we even have people that have, cognitive disabilities. So I consider myself neurodiverse because I have ADHD and OCD. So I'm more on the cognitive side, but then we have people with physical disabilities, and then we have people who use different assistive technology. And then where we identify any potential gaps, we do encourage user research wherever possible, to make sure that we are getting the right feedback from the right user groups to make sure that our products are accessible. But as part of our more generic global hiring practices, making sure that we hire people with disabilities is something that is important to us, and our team is very, very diverse as a result of those hiring practices.
And I would say that
So Adam, go ahead.
I would say that that diversity on our team is really helpful. But one of the things that I have found the most helpful is the user research that Jacqui mentioned. And even as a screen reader user, there are just certain things that I'm a little biased to. Some of it is because I'm familiar with the way it was put together. I know what the intended outcomes are and how I expect somebody to use it. And in that, there are times that you kind of lose sight of the people who are beginning to use it or didn't know all of the background. So the user research has really given me an opportunity to observe somebody who's using a screen reader, somebody who's using a magnifier, or even in our last research group, we had people who were using voice control. And the perspectives that I got out of that research really helped with the choices that we made in updating the components. There were a couple of times that I was surprised, in fact, to see how a keyboard user might do something that I never anticipated, and that really helped in helping to fix some of the issues that we had.
So is this research that is internal to Salesforce, or is like academic or broad research?
So we do have internal research teams that we partner with, but our team focuses on, we have a couple of vendor relationships where they provide us with different groups. So depending upon the particular user research that we want to conduct, they'll be able to give us qualified candidates. So we work with Blind IT or BIT and with Mark Hess. He's the one that founded that organization, and we also partner or contract with Fable, which is a user research company in Canada, and they provide us with qualified candidates, and they help us to run our different user research campaigns.
I think that diversity of the way people use things is, and I guess in today's world, where I'm often jumping onto apps and trying to get things through my smartphone with a screen reader on there, which is totally different experience to the one on a laptop experience. So it is, and actually I totally endorse what you just said, Adam, because one of my current fears is learning how to use Gen I tools, because people who look at the screen and see all the components on the screen think it may well make logical sense, but actually doing it from just hearing what your screen reader generates is actually really daunting. So, but I'm sure we'll come back to Gen AI later in the conversation. So spreading the word throughout the Salesforce organization is obviously a big part of what you do. How easy has that been, given the number of acquisitions that you have? Because you keep gobbling up all of these different companies to keep building and maintaining the Salesforce momentum. Does that become part of the acquisition process, the merger and acquisition process?
So I'm not intimately familiar with how accessibility is baked into the actual acquisition process, but I do know it from once they are acquired and we start building relationships with the existing, accessibility folks, so we have Tableau, we've got MuleSoft, we've got Slack, and obviously a lot of other companies that have been acquired, but the big ones have accessibility teams, and partnering with them and collaborating with them is a great way for us to, create efficiencies. So maybe, Slack has already solved something that we have yet to solve within our applications, and we can, have that conversation with them to improve our accessibility outcomes as a result of work that they already did. So I think that there's more work for us to do there to increase that collaboration, and to help to accelerate accessibility across all of our product line. But it is about building those relationships and working together and seeing how we can, benefit each other from the work that we've done.
I think the whole notion of, and I think Adam, you touched upon this, the building blocks and making sure that the main components are accessible, and then building towards the application and the launch, and then testing it on the. I mean, how long a process are we talking about? What sort of, do you have any idea what sort of man effort is required to actually make sure things are accessible for when you have a big launch of a software release?
I would say that it kind of happens over multiple releases. One of the things at Salesforce is that we commit to having 3 different releases each year. So in that release life cycle, we're going through and dealing with incoming bugs as people find those and submit cases to our accessibility support team. But also making sure that the things that we're building new are working, and then that those things are fitting in with the new product and the base components that they're using. I think maybe to get a little bit more into what you're asking is that you have many different teams who are working there. And so one team is supporting the building blocks while another team is working on fitting them together and the particular experience, maybe say in Service Cloud. And we tend to have accessibility engineers who then work with those specific product teams who are building out, for example, the Service Cloud experience. And as we're working on it, they're looking at how do these things work and what do we need to pass back maybe to the base components team in order to support the thing that we're creating, or to help out if there was maybe a miss in how accessible that is. So it is kind of a back and forth between different teams and making sure that this team has left room in their release for accessibility work, and that this team maybe is working on things that we're discovering that maybe we didn't throughout our manual testing. So it is a lot of working pieces, and how people calculate the amount of hours that it takes to do that is something that I'm not familiar with, but we have lots of product management that kind of keeps on track of that and keeps us all tied together.
And Jacqui, I guess Adam's described it from the bottom up, from the building blocks up, but do you also look at it from the user interface back? Because I'm assuming, or sorry, the assumption is that the devices, whether it's just an iPhone or a Samsung Android or a laptop, that they have the accessibility tools, either third party or built in. How much would you say accessibility and inclusion has changed the user interface? Because I must confess that back in about 2006, having my first exposure to a Salesforce, and I couldn't use it as a blind person. So because there was so much information on the screen, so many tabs, so many things that it was impossible to use. How does having accessibility as part of the design process impact the ultimate user interface, the ultimate way the product looks to the customer?
Yeah, so having executive leadership over on the UX side that's very passionate about accessibility is definitely helpful. So Kat Holmes is our Chief Design Officer, and she's knowledgeable about accessibility and passionate about it. So one of the key challenges is obviously Salesforce is a complex, series of products, right? So we have a complex and layered UI. So, having accessibility be important to our executive leadership and all the things that we're creating for the future is helping us to make things that are ultimately universally more easy to use. So thinking about, creating efficiencies with, component libraries like Adam alluded to earlier, as well as design systems, and coming up with the latest iteration of those components and design systems that make them more nimble and flexible, and more, intrinsic to the user is helping to create better user experiences. But it's an evolution and it takes time, but really having accessibility be something that's prioritized and part of our definition of ready, our definition of done, and having it be top of mind for our leadership allows us to prioritize it, and it helps to shape and inform, the latest iterations of what our interface looks like and what it will look like, in the next 6 months or 12 months with the new design work that's coming out.
And you're making a very important point at the universality of it, which is you try to get the sort of all the sort of cases out there, all the variability out there, and that benefits everybody. even not necessarily in an explicit way, but eventually we all benefit from an easier interface and a better interface. And your approach is very interesting because, you know, I say you're sort of building it from the ground up. You're not going back and say, okay, this is not working very well. Let's just fix everything, a couple of things, kind of like an aesthetic kind of, you know, make it look better. You start from the core. And as you say, it's an evolution. So I would say maybe you can talk about how is that evolution, because this is an incremental process. We don't know what is the perfectly inclusive design. So I would imagine that the first time around, it's very hard, a lot of work, but then eventually it just gets better because you just build on top of what you already have. Is that the case? Or how does that work in terms of from one release to the next? You don't start from scratch again, right?
No, obviously we have to take a multi-pronged approach because we have existing UI out there, right, that exists today, that if there are accessibility issues, we have to address those concerns, right? And so we have, you know, some of our programs and our work focuses on resolving existing tech debt, but then it's about that shift left approach for us to bake it into the entire life cycle so that we're preventing it from shipping at all, right? And so we always have to be mindful of let's, you know, work with our existing interfaces, but then make sure that any, you know, new products that come out or new, you know, design systems that come out or things like that, you know, we're making sure that accessibility is baked in from the beginning. You know, so I don't know, Adam, if you can talk more about kind of your experience on that hybrid of needing to fix what exists, but also making sure that anything new is accessible out the door.
Sure. I think that the big piece of this is the design phase. And anytime that we talk about a shift left, that usually is where things need to start, is ensuring that designers understand what people who use assistive technologies need, what things are going to be helpful to them, and what ways can we improve that. And so with our digital accessibility engineers working so closely with design, we're able to help identify in the very initial phase what things should work, what things need to be communicated to the engineers. A big piece of that is what the keyboard support looks like, and just ensuring that we're thinking about things like, are there hotkeys? And if there are hotkeys, are they discoverable? How can we make those things discoverable? If we are thinking about a very complicated interface, and ours is, then what are some of the shortcuts that we can make it simpler for a person to get from point A to point B so that they can accomplish the task? A big piece of what we do at Salesforce is really oriented around what's the job to be done. And so keeping that centered in our design approach, we can think about what is it that we are asking a particular persona to do, and then how can we break that down and make it a little simpler for the person who's using the assistive technologies. And you sort of talked a little bit about this, Chris, but one of our focuses is that we really want to think about how do we make the system work for different assistive technologies, and what APIs, what kind of base building blocks are used that interface correctly with those assistive technologies so that they do what they need to do. And we're not focusing on, like, if I make it say this, that will help a screen reader user. If I do this, that will help a speech control user, because it's just a lot of boxes that you have to check along the way. Where if you can focus more on, are we doing things in a very standard way that all of the assistive technologies understand, then they should be able to do the things that work well for them. And if that experience then is not exactly what we wanted, we find that out when we get the user feedback, and really focusing on either doing user research in the beginning to question, is this the right way? Or getting feedback from users saying that this didn't work necessarily well for me, and if you could do this, that might work better.
Do you have an example of something that, you tried to do and it just wasn't working, or that you hear and then it's like, oh, like, I mean, because it's hard, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting to see, I say a lot of the time we sort of go by trial and error to some extent, right? So sometimes you might just not get it right the first time around.
Yeah, that definitely happens. And in fact, we had been working on some issues that we had with inline errors. So these are error messages that get presented to the user as they tab away from a field. Maybe validation is run on that field, and then the system tells them that this either needed to be filled in, or maybe the format wasn't quite right. And so we've had a few different revisions of how can we make that work best? What sort of technology, if that's ARIA Live for a screen reader, and what different ways for the screen reader user do we present that? We did some user testing, got some really good feedback, tried that out, and then got user feedback once that was live that it maybe was not exactly what they wanted. So that's an example of a place where we have asked, we have tried, we've gotten more feedback, we've tried again, and just continue to refine until we hit that sweet spot that seems to work for the majority.
And Adam, are you talking there about people within Salesforce testing it, or also getting feedback once it's gone live with customers? Because one of the things I'm fascinated, obviously, with Inclusively that we're looking at mainly looks at the telecom industry, and I'm curious if there are any industries that you come across that are particularly good at giving you feedback and saying this is not quite right and can you improve this? So any experience? So is it just internal feedback, or are you getting it all the way back from the customer as well? And any particularly good industries who are good at giving feedback on it?
We are getting a lot of feedback from the customers that are coming through our accessibility support team. That's something that we have really developed over the past few years anyway, and it's expanded quite a lot. We had originally been handling that all within our team, and we were getting a few reports back from time to time. I'm not sure if it was that maybe publicizing the fact that we had the accessibility support team helped more people to understand how they could log those type of cases, but we definitely have seen a real increase in the number of cases and the amount of feedback that we are getting from users, and that we are then able to filter into the development process and then get those bugs fixed, depending on what it is. As for the different industries that use it, it's a little bit harder for me. I see things on the bug end, which is a little less from the customer side, but judging from a few of the customers that I've seen, it kind of spans across a lot of different things, some of which are maybe a little telco related, people who are using our service offering when they're responding to their customers, to other people who are working in more regulated areas such as banking, and healthcare has been a big one lately. So that involves a little more rigidity around what are some of the requirements. And it really has been great to get that feedback, because it's twofold. It helps us then to find the problems that we may have overlooked, but it also really gives the reinforcement that people are using this and people are either enjoying or finding issues that we then can fix.
And in terms of your as a blind person, visually impaired person, doing your job, are there any things that drive you mad that cause you particular problems in terms of being able to do the job, in terms of communicating, in terms of coding, in terms of interacting, any particular areas? And then Jacqui, if you can make any comments also afterwards on from a neurodiverse perspective as well.
I know that an area that is a struggle for me is on things like color contrast and looking at reflow issues. It's something that, because they're so visual, I struggle with that. I do have a really great team though, and so anytime I encounter something that I'm just not sure about, it's pretty easy to ping somebody and say, hey, would you take a look at this? Or what do you think this is? Or maybe I didn't quite understand the way something was described. But one of the things that is really kind of nice and that I think is helpful both to me and to the designer is that if I'm helping to talk through a design in the early phases when it's just wireframes or it exists in, say, a Figma file, it's often difficult because there's not any way that a screen reader can interact with that. So I'm pretty reliant on a designer describing what the interface is, but it's nice because in getting them to talk through their design, they're becoming a little more intimate with what the design is and thinking about what a blind person might need. So I think that it's beneficial to them. And for me, I do a lot of then visualization of what I think it is that we're talking about. And a lot of that, luckily, is we're pretty consistent in what our interfaces look like. So unless something is radically new and kind of a departure from the usual design, I have a good idea of what that looks like in relationship to what kind of things already exist. So I found that, though, to be a good design process for them and also something to help me be a little more familiar with the way that things look and getting a grasp of what people perceive in our interface visually. I think that sometimes as blind users, we, as you said earlier, we kind of take things out of context. We see them as the screen reader presents each thing. And for me, being able to get an idea of what the bigger picture is and how that all fits together, what are the relationships on the screen from left to right, top to bottom, how things relate to one another is helpful.
And in fact, I was talking with the Be My Eyes people this last week about the Be My Eyes on the Windows platform, where you can get the Be My Eyes to tell you what's on the screen now. So rather than a screen reader, it's actually looking at the picture of what's on your screen. So that I think, and I'm meeting the guys next week up in Copenhagen. So I'll feed more back to you when I get more information on that. But yeah, I totally agree.
Following up on this, isn't that the kind of thing that Gen AI could be very helpful? Because you can talk to the software developers and they can tell you what things look like. But in general, if you're presented in whenever circumstance of a figure, you need to have maybe something like Be My Eyes or something like that. But that's where Gen AI seem like could be very helpful in trying to say this is what it is in words and translate.
This is what it looks like, and then you compare the way you then receive information about it. Jacqui, anything from your own circumstances or from thinking about it from the neurodiverse point of view that occurs to you when talking about the interface and how we build things more accessibly?
Yeah, I think that from a neurodiverse perspective, having like complicated UI, but making it as intrinsic to the user as possible, elegant and simplify it where you can, because the more complicated it is, the more you have to pay, close attention to, are we over complicating this, right? Are we over, engineering this, and to make sure that, making, that things are simple and elegant and intuitive to the user, that really helps people from a neurodiverse perspective. But then it really helps everyone, so if we can really have some, a clean, intuitive, design where a person doesn't have to do a lot of heavy lifting with figuring out how to use the application, I think is definitely where we should evolve, when we're designing our products, when we're coding our products, make sure that it's simple and elegant and intuitive as possible.
Now, doesn't that also help with sort of digital inclusion? And I don't mean, obviously your users are by definition connected, but not everybody has the same skills or the same how can I say, patience, I would say. They might just say, oh, forget it, this is just too much. So isn't that also helping that kind of inclusivity?
Absolutely. Yeah. The simpler and more elegant the design is, the easier it is for us to use and the more universality we have behind it, for sure. I'm sorry, exactly. I didn't interrupt. I don't know who that was.
No, you were clear. That's good. And I think to go to the Gen AI issue, then of course that the ability to build an interface, it might even be a spoken interface in the future. It might be a gesture interface, where we can actually use that to get into it. So connecting all the way down through the layers to draw the bit of data out, and I know I certainly use that with the various smart speakers that I have scattered around the house and the office, which become very useful. And I can only see that getting more useful. So I think the problem we have is that the interface has been defined by technology and by programming and by the ability to put icons on the screen or whatever it is. And I think we're now at a stage where actually we can build an interface that is very simple to use, and we don't need to clutter the screen. And certainly from my point of view as a blind user, the clutter on there is the worst thing, because I think, I don't know, Adam, I don't know what your threshold is, but if I have to tab more than 50 times, I give up. I'll go and do something else, because it just gets too infuriatingly frustrating.
I definitely understand that perspective, and just being overwhelmed by the different things that are there, and oftentimes it's like, how many different ways can you do something? So
yep, I agree. And obviously, which areas do you think need most work? So stepping back, Jacqui, and thinking about the bigger, the broader accessibility inclusion topic, are there any areas that you think, we still need, not just Salesforce, but which areas need a lot more work on? Because screen reader technology has got much better. We're talking about Gen AI, possibly sign language being interpreting and stuff like that. So the interface should become better. Are there any particular areas where you think, we need to work a lot on these areas for the next couple of years?
I think that we really need to take great care in making sure that we're incorporating Gen AI safely and accurately. I think that they're obviously in everyone's, mad rush to, get onto the next great thing with generative AI, we have to make sure that we're doing things responsibly and accurately. And they're, people think, okay, it's Gen AI, it's a computer doing this, so it's inherently neutral. But, if there are humans that are adding the code, or humans that are adding the data sets, then those things could inherently include biases, or lack of accessibility on the coding side. So I think that that's where we have a lot of work to do. So Paula Goldman is leading the charge with a lot of Gen AI teams and making sure that it's trusted, and that they're testing the data sets and making sure that those biases and inaccuracies are not being included, where these computers are not learning them or incorporating them inadvertently. So I feel like we have a huge responsibility to make sure that Gen AI benefits everyone and doesn't inadvertently leave people behind, or accidentally shed light on some biases that we don't want those data sets to include. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there in order to make sure that Gen AI, the next great thing, is a benefit to everyone.
Now, you mentioned biases, and clearly that's a big issue. Because the biases exist in the data, so it's hard to remove them. But the other thing is deep fakes. And so basically the content that is generated might not be accurate. Might be a fake. And clearly that's a problem, that's an issue for everybody. But you could imagine that disabled people might be more susceptible, or they might have a harder time to identify fakes. It's not for everybody, but is there any specific issue that you're facing in that respect?
Yeah, obviously a person needs to rely on a computer to, compare two images, and then the feedback that they're getting, they need to be able to trust it. It needs to be there needs to be a high degree of accuracy in order for it to be something that benefits a person who is non-visual, for instance. So I do think, I believe, Gen AI can be an unbelievable, equality maker, right? Where people can actually benefit greatly. More people can be, enter into the workforce, for instance, because Gen AI can be a great tool for them to use. But if, the accuracy isn't 97% or greater, obviously giving that small window for inconsistencies. But if it's something that they can only rely on being accurate, 50 or 60% of the time, like that's too large of a gap. And we could inadvertently be creating barriers to access for people with disabilities rather than opening doors for them like Gen AI has the potential to do. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges there, and our team and the larger org that Adam and I are a part of, it's really important work that they're prioritizing to do to make sure that accuracy and that trust is there.
And it's also fair to say that the large language models are the big ones that get talked about all the time. They are very conscious of this issue, but it's a hell of a job to get all of the bias out. If you're learning based upon the last however many years of the internet, there's a lot of bias in there. So I think it is. I think people don't realize what a big job it is. But I'm glad to hear it's up there with you. One question that occurs to me actually while we're talking is that the tools that we use to test accessibility, is that something that you already envisage that Gen AI will help with? Is that because we see, we're trying to automate everything, aren't we? So, ideally, will we have tools that will just go through it and check and throw back at you rather than the testing that we perhaps do more manually today?
So I am more conservative in my beliefs around how automated testing for accessibility can be. I do think that humans will always be needed for that. Do I think that there's a great opportunity to create efficiencies in our work where we can save ourselves time, where we can save ourselves money? Absolutely. So can we perhaps enhance our automated tools that rather than find 30% of programmatically determinable accessibility issues, can we get it to maybe 50% or maybe a little bit better? Absolutely. But do I always think that that humans will play an important role? Yes, that's a hill I'm currently willing to die on.
We did a session at Barcelona before Mobile World Congress with Monica, and one of the people there was Maria Petrova from Intentful, which is a New York-based startup. And she said in all the Gen AI stuff they're doing, they always have two pairs of eyes on the on a particular cycle. So there's always two people. I did take her to task when she said two pairs of eyes, but because obviously they don't all need to be able to see to do it. But your point is absolutely spot on, that we will never automate everything, and we must make sure we keep that human element on there. Monica, last couple of questions. Oh, sorry, Adam, go on.
Adam.
I was about to say Adam wanted to talk about something.
I think in the end too, certainly having a human at the helm who's looking at what the output of the AI is important. But I think along with that, being able to test something with people who are familiar with the assistive technologies is something that we should never get away from, because I think that's an important piece to ensuring that we know, because we used whatever technology it is, that should work in the way that we expected it to.
So of course, Adam, what I should have said at the beginning was, you should, if you want to say something and I'm cutting across you, just raise your hand, because my screen reader will tell me you've raised your hand. So as opposed to Monica spotting that you could that you were looking for something. So apologies for that.
Sure.
Perhaps coming towards the end a little bit, one of my final questions is, you are, certainly from my experience of working with you over the years, the thinking within the organization, the position you've already talked about that your group has within the organization, the fact that Benhoff is aware of it and supports it totally. Are there any key lessons that you would pass on to companies who may just be starting this journey? Because I think for many, especially in the telecom industry, it has been a CSR issue. It's not really mainstream, and of course the telcos have then got that extension out to not just the business customers, the B2B like you have, but also that massive swathe of consumers who are even more diverse in their requirements. So any sort of top tips that you'd pass on to the people not so far along the journey as you are?
Yeah, from a strategic perspective, definitely getting executive level support and getting an executive to sponsor it, for them to be passionate about it, for them to believe in it, and to, understand that accessibility is going to always need to be something that gets prioritized, because it's iterative, it evolves as technology evolves and changes. And to make sure that you're kind of attacking the problem from multiple angles in order to scale the impact of the work that you're doing, especially the larger and more complicated your organization is, the more multi-pronged your programmatic approach to the work needs to be. But yeah, it's like an understanding that, scale and sustainability and creating those efficiencies, that's where you will probably want to focus. Because impact, you want to make sure everything that you're doing has the biggest impact, across the board as possible. So I don't know, Adam, if you have any technical insight that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think Jacqui took what I was thinking is the most important, but sticking with the kind of top down versus bottom up, I think that if you're looking to get started here, then user experience is something that you need to really be involved with. That oftentimes people will think about accessibility as being a role of engineering, thinking about the different attributes that they have to put on or how the HTML works and things like that. But it really does start with user experience, and you really need for your folks in user experience to understand the different personas. And so building in those personas of making sure that we're designing for everyone and not just for the current person who's designing.
May I ask a sort of final question that is sort of like connected to this? In telecoms, we often say, we are slow. Everybody else is so much better. So we have this kind of like, we think that everybody's doing things better. Do you think that we are behind in inclusivity, behind other sectors, or are we just doing okay?
Well, Adam, do you have any thoughts as a user of telecom services? We're not asking you to speak on behalf of Salesforce here, but as an individual, do you get good service from your telcos, from your mobile and cable and telecoms providers?
And compared to like other things you do in life that do not require connectivity.
Yeah, I guess that it does sort of depend. And when I think about things from the end user versus like I think of telco, the first thing that comes to mind is somebody who's working in customer service. And I think that as far as thinking about people with disabilities has come a long way, which is awesome. But I do think that there are some issues when it comes to the end user and getting support with simple things like being able to read your bill and figure out what went into the amount that you're being charged. I've seen that really evolve over the years. It's gotten much, much better, but there's still room for improvement in a lot of places. And a lot of that, I think, probably comes down to legacy systems. So as we see some of these bigger telco providers here in the United States move over to newer websites, then the accessibility seems to improve.
It's actually one of the case studies that people put forward all the time of Gen I of interrogating your bill by asking a simple question. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I think we need to wrap up. Sorry, Jacqui, go ahead.
Just that obviously, defer to Adam as a unique user, but yeah, the fact that I once worked in a customer service role and for the systems that they once had to be something that a person who used assistive technology could not effectively be employed in those roles, but seeing more and more that those barriers to access are being eliminated as better technologies and more accessible technologies are being utilized. Because in addition to being an accessibility person, I'm a huge advocate for disability hiring best practices, and to make sure that when we hire people with disabilities, that we give them all the tools that they need to succeed. So in the telecom industry, seeing massive improvements there is a huge win.
I think that's a fair comment. I think the legacy comment is also very valid in terms of what data you need to extract from what system to answer your question about what the bill has been and that customer experience. It is so important, and we are seeing many more openings for employment. And I think that's the balance we've seen in a lot of the inclusively stuff we've done is telcos are moving towards a more diverse workforce. But then the next step is that customer experience, understanding the customer, understanding those personas, and rendering the service to them in a way which is suitable for them, that they choose rather than dictated to them by the customer. But Jacqui and Adam, just thank you so much. The Salesforce story, obviously since 20 years ago when I first stumbled and couldn't use Salesforce, it sounds like it's now become way more accessible. Congratulations on all the moves all the developments in there. And we look forward to hearing more about it. And Monica, any final word from you?
Yeah, I think that this is really heartwarming to see that actually we're making some progress. We're not there yet, but we're going, I think, in the right direction with companies like yours. So this is really great to see and hear from you.
Yeah, thanks both very much. Great to have you on Inclusively.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you all for watching this online.